The next item on the agenda is budget projections, and Mr. Szablowski has put us out to 2016 now.
Yes. Let me,
On item.
actually, I'm going to hide it so you can look at all the columns together. Okay, by special request from my chair, I was asked to extend my projections. Now you have to understand, going out the additional fourth and fifth year creates a whole lot more questions whether these are going to be accurate or not. But it does, I found in looking at this, show the miracle of compound interest, and not so much compound interest, but compound no taxes. Because what I'm doing here in 13-14 is I have the 13-14 budget as adopted. And you can see that our revenue went up 3.74%. And we are looking at, with our expenditures went up 4.5%, and there's that $750,000, which is the first year that we're utilizing our committed fund balance. So if we look at the top line, all I'm doing for the current tax, which is our 6111 figure, see if I can increase that a little bit. Is that better? And all I'm doing is I'm not raising the tax rate at all. I'm just saying that we're going to continue to grow in our assessment value at 1% per year, keeping the millage the same. And this is what would happen. We would get, we're planning to get $55.7 million. We billed $55.7 million of tax bills this year, minus the 1.75, which is the slot machine revenue for property tax relief. So you have to look at those numbers in combination. But I keep that same. It's been right around 1.8, 1.75. So that's why I assume going forward. And all I do is just add 1% to each of those years. So you can see that we're picking up in the 14-15 year, just what's that, the 400, 300, about $600,000 just on assessments alone. So it's about 550 to 600,000 a year, just with the new houses that we're projecting are going to be built. Well, yes.
I know I have it here. What was the assessed value this year increase? Wasn't it like 5% or something?
Yeah, well, on average it was 5. It was a little bit, on average it was about 3%. It was about 5% in Montgomery, about 1% in Berks.
Okay.
This is assuming no tax increases. We don't want to put that in right now. We want to look at worst case scenario. Looking at our other projections of interim taxes, that's on houses that are built and taxed after they're built after July 1st. So we do send them tax bills. Our earned income, I'm already increasing the earned income realization of the 1% tax because as you'll see when we get into the 12-13 budget, I always say this Boyertown's phenomenal because as bad as the economy has been, we collected almost $100,000 more than budgeted in earned income tax. So there are people out there that are seeing more money. Maybe that's the influx of people coming in and the fact that we're taxing their earnings, but it continues to rise about $100,000 a year. Now, being conservative, I'm going to keep it at that $5.7 million for the next 5 years. Then we have our transfer taxes. That's going to go up. That's when you settle your house at settlement, the 1% comes out, 0.5% goes to the county, 0.5% comes to us. So that's been, we haven't really hit our budget numbers over the last few years, but as we see the new houses continue to grow and more brisk exchanges of houses, we realize more. So this was actually the closest year. I think we got about 70% of what I budgeted this year, which is better than the 65% I budgeted the year before. So then we have our delinquent tax collection.
So Dave, I'm sorry, what you just explained on the transfer tax?
Yeah.
Did you adjust the future years then to make it more closer to budget? Or do you, Yeah, if we're only, if we're hitting 70% of what we budgeted, did you adjust the future years or no?
Well, no, I
Yeah.
kept it at 900,000. See, this year, we're only gonna hit about 700,000 of the 900. I'm staying optimistic, which is against my nature of being conservative. I
Right,
should
that's
really
why I'm
reduce
asking the
that
question.
down to 700,000, but by doing that, that's almost a tenth of a mil that we'd have to raise taxes. But so we make it up in other areas, like Berk's, like the earned income tax, or in our delinquent taxes, because coming here from Reading and dealing with, you know, the tax base we had there and having a 85–86% collection rate, I come to Boyertown and people, we got the tax bills out January 1st. I had people come in and pay their tax bills bills went out July 1st. People came in and paid their tax bills on July 2nd. And that really helps our cash flow. And I appreciate people that don't want to owe anybody any money, but they do that. And overall, we collect 99.5% of the taxes we bill July 1st by the next June 30th, either through the tax collectors or through our efforts through the delinquent taxes. And I don't know that there's many school districts that can say that.
Well, do you adjust that for example, if they paid July 1st to get a discount? And that would be a discount of the net, and after August or something like that, September, they pay a penalty.
Right.
Do you adjust for that?
We do. We forecast that out, because it's pretty consistent every year. We have so many people that pay under the discount, and then we have so many people that pay at the penalty. We normally budget around 96%, so we don't have to budget people paying at discount or people paying it at delinquent. It all goes into one number, and then you know, we usually hit 96–96.5% collection. Then that other 3.5% could be that they're paying more under the discount, or it could be that they're delinquent, and then they get turned over to our delinquency. We try our best for 2 months to collect, then they go to the attorney, and we normally collect the other 3-point-some% by the end of June 30th.
On the delinquent tax, if there's a sheriff's sale and the house is sold as sheriff's sale, well, it's not really sold, the bank buys it back, the mortgage holder, when do you get the taxes for that?
Normally the next month after that,
So-
on a
so they
prorated
pay-
basis.
Okay, so my house is in sheriff's sale status right now. So, give me a, for instance, I don't think you understood my question.
Okay.
So I already owe this year's taxes, last year's taxes. It takes a bank a while until they finally get you up to sheriff's sale.
Correct.
So now, I owe last year, and I owe the school district for the year before, because that comes out the second half. Okay, so I owe just the school district 1 year, the county and the school district the second year. Now we're in the third year, it finally gets sold. The mortgage holder buys it back, because it's not worth as much as is owed on.
Right.
When do you get all those taxes?
Shortly after the sale completes,
The sale to the
back to the
mortgage
bank.
company?
Yes,
Oh, okay, so you do get it right away?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then, you know, the property owner would only get the net, if it's sold for more than they owe the mortgage.
No, it's not, that's why the mortgage company bought it
Right,
back.
so then the homeowner would get nothing.
Right, I realize that, but I was worried about our taxes. When do we get those? Does that wait until the mortgage company or the bank sells it to the next person?
Yeah, we always like when the mortgage company buys it back, because they're always good to pay us our
So they
taxes,
do
and
pay
they
you
take
right
the
away
hit,
then?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's prorated to it.
Well, on sheriff's sale, if it's not the bank buying it back and they sell it for something less than what's owed to the bank and what's owed to the city, what's owed to the county, what's owed to the school district, then it's all divvied up on a prorated basis. They take our 23 mills as compared to Berks County's 12 mills, and then they divvy up the money like that. So we have to take a loss of that.
But you got something.
And got some.
But not when it's done the way I said.
No, the way you said, we prefer the method you say, because when the bank buys it back, they're usually good to pay us. It's when somebody else besides the bank has it up for sheriff's sale.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, and then we have, you know, and these are all of our local revenues. We got, you know, other little taxes like occupational privilege, LST. There's our interest earnings, which, you know, we've seen a decline over the years, but I am projecting based on, my discussions with Lauren and Brad that they will come back in the 16-17 year. And then we have other local revenues. Then we get into the state, which I highlighted in yellow because it's a big question mark whether they're going to give us an increase or not, and what equation they're going to be using. So, being conservative, I took what they gave us this year and I projected it out for 5 years, saying, well, they're not going to give us any more. Now, is that realistic? Hopefully not, but I wanted to show you worst case scenario. Then we get into the other charter school disappeared several years ago. We have our special education, which has been consistent and hasn't increased over the past 6 years. I don't project it's going to increase over the next 5 either. We have our transportation. That's been pretty consistent at 2.9. Here's our rental subsidy. You can see that it's going up, but if the plan con doesn't work, then that number is going to be something I'm going to have to adjust on a cash flow basis. It won't affect this because I'll still accrue that as being owed to me by the state sometime in the future whenever they get enough money. Then there's the property tax relief, which is the exact opposite of what's on the second line up there because it becomes a state revenue from the slot machine. Social Security is based on 7.65% of the expense down below, and then 50% of that is our Social Security. And then we get the other highlighted number, which is the PSERS, which again is 50% of the number down below, which is the expenditure. And then we have other state subsidies. And then we don't include in here anything about the federal access Title I, Title II. Those monies are already spoken for, so we eliminate those so we don't have to deal with those. So you can see that we're looking at 2.07% increase, 1.5% increase, 1.2, 1.0, and 1.11 in revenue in the next 5 years. So now we turn our review to the expenditures, and obviously the first two, wages and benefits, are the largest. We did budget 3%. Now again, the 3% is not everybody getting 3%. Some people getting more, some people getting less, but it's the net based on 20 or 30 teachers retiring. So, depending on how many teachers retire, that's a good thing for budget, and that will net out. But I had to use some kind of percentage, so I kept it at 3. So every one of these categories, from administrative down to paraprofessionals, is budgeted currently at 3%. And I have this set up so if we want to change that 3 to a 2, it's going to change all the numbers all the way across. So that's the interactive piece that Mrs. Hartford asked me to do, that what if we do this, and what if we do that, and then we can add a certain millage increase to affect the bottom line. So we'll just leave it at 3% for now, and you can see how the numbers go up. And then we get into the benefits. Besides retirement, the largest cost we have is the health insurance. You can see that it stayed stable at the 6.9%, 6.9 million this year. There was a 4% premium increase, but with the teachers and administrators and hourly staff paying more towards it, it netted out to be a 0% increase net. And talking with Banyan, they said that with Obamacare kicking in, maybe not next year now, that they made the announcement in July, but the year after, so this 8% I have budgeted for next fiscal year might be something less than that, since we won't have to supply insurance to all of our paraprofessionals and part-time people that currently don't get benefits. But it is compounded at 8% for the next 5 years. Hopefully, we'll have to talk as we build these budgets how much of our fund balance or excess that we have in reserve for health care we can use to hopefully stabilize those at a figure less than 8%. And then we get into dental insurance, pretty consistent over the years, as is life insurance, vision insurance, and disability. They're very small amounts. But then we get into the FICA. You can see that from the calculation up above, that's 7.65% of the salary from this line. And then half of that figure goes up here to the state as Social Security revenue subsidy. And then the next highlighted line is our big amount that we've been trying to deal with for the last few years. You can see what the rates are this year. We budgeted $8,064,000. That was for a 16.93% rate. And then next year's rate, if you look up in the top box, is 21.18%. then it jumps to 23.66%, and it jumps to 24.5%, and now adding these additional 2 years, we're 25.27% and 26.4%. And from that point, it'll sort of level out between 26 and 27%, and we'll be over that skyrocketing that we've been looking at for the last 5 years. At that point, we will have enough millage built into the budget to fund that. You know, I look at PSERS as much like a debt service, that we know that this is coming, we know that those rates are going to be there. We have to slowly add our millage until we can fund 25 to 27% of the salary figure. And then if it stays 27% through the rest of the eternity, we probably won't see anything less than that in our lifetimes. We'll have the millage in place to hopefully fund that. Then the only variable is how much do the salaries increase? And does the state ever run out of money so that we get our rental or our retirement subsidy? So that's one of the big areas we have to look at. Then we get into tuition reimbursement, and prior to the last 2 years where they've been on a pay freeze, it's been pretty steady around $450,000 to $500,000 in reimbursement. Again, this is all going to be subject to a new teacher contract, subject to June 30th when this contract expires. Then we have our unemployment. It appears that we've gotten over a very difficult couple years where it's not so much that the people that we had employed that we laid off, but the people that left us to find other work that then get laid off because we were their last employer of any significance. We end up paying that unemployment, which has never been right, but that's the way the system works. Yeah, and the other thing that you're probably not aware of is that when we have a teacher that's a daily sub and they get $100, $110 a day, and say the last 90 days of the year, we have a teacher go out on a family medical leave or child rearing, right? So we bring that daily sub teacher who was working sporadically in our district and at Upper Perk and Daniel Boone and Ole, and we say, we're going to give you a contract for 91 days, which makes you an LTS. And as of June 30th or the last day of school, you've been paid, you're done, thank you for your service. Well, by them being a sub, they're not really a full-time teacher for us, but they go and they claim, and they get unemployment because they get the difference between the $100 that they would have made if they stayed daily sub and the $200-some that they get for LTS. That then is they're saying is an economic loss to them, and the state gives them our money to get them through the summer. So it's just a system that we're dealt with, and we have to deal with it. Workers' comp has been one of the things that we've been most proud of. Our mod this year was announced at 0.91. As I said, with the other contractors, 1.0 is average. Anything above 1 is bad. We're at 0.91 this year, so we're above average as far as our workers' comp. A lot of credit goes to our safety committee for that. So those are our benefits, and you can see that of the 90-some million dollars at the bottom, 66.5 million is in salaries and benefits. And then we get into our controllable costs, which we talk about every year, which is the professional services, mainly the Berks EIT collecting our earned income tax, Jeff Sultanic for doing his legal services, and some special needs from the BCIU. That makes up pretty much all our professional services. Get into our contracted services, and that's our rental of our copiers, maintenance agreements on our IT and on our, in Paul's area as far as machinery goes. Purchase services. Now this is one that we may want to play around with because this is the last year of our transportation contract. So we talked about putting out an RFP come January. That may likely change that number either up or down, because when you go out for RFP you could get possible high numbers, but we're hoping to get low numbers. The other variable, large variable that goes into purchase services is out of district placements and tuition. So most of that is cyber charter, charter schools, and special placements for special education. That makes up 100% of our tuition that we pay elsewhere. And also BCTC's in there.
To cyber school,
Transportation,
No, transportation is one purchase service.
okay.
And then the tuition that we pay to cyber charters, the tuition we pay to special schools for special needs, and the tuition we pay to BCTC are all included in that
In the
budget.
same category, okay.
So you can see it makes up a rather large, because if you're looking at the 66.5 million plus almost 12 million, I mean, that's 78 million of a $97 million budget. That's a large chunk. Then we have our supplies and textbooks. Obviously, the kids need glue sticks, erasers, paper, all that kind of stuff. Also janitorial and maintenance supplies are in there also. And we have equipment. We've been kind of steady with that, about 350 to 400,000 a year, most of it being technology. And then we get into the areas that Brad and Lauren talk about, which is the interest and fees and the debt service and interfund transfer. So in here, it totals $7.9 million. $1 million is the technology reserve transfer that we do every year. We also have any kind of budgetary reserve just in case we have something that happens, like, I don't know if you remember the mold issue we had at Pine Forge, those kind of things, which is why you need budgetary reserve. But the majority of that is our debt service, interest, and principal. So that's where you see some of these lines starting to go up, and that's when you see, when we get out to the years, it actually declines because of what Brad said, that a lot of our debt disappears.
So
So-
does this assume that we're putting in the new debt right there?
This does assume that it'll bring, because it's being replaced
Right.
with the new debt.
Right.
So on the, you mentioned about the $1 million technology budget. If I recall, we authorized borrow from ourselves another
Well,
million.
that's the internal lease we do. But
Yes.
There's another $1 million that transfers directly out of the general fund into technology reserve, which pays for 4 years' worth of leasing of computers that the kids
Right.
work on. So every year they take that $1 million and, just 200, just an example, 250,000 pays for the lease that's 4 years old, the lease is 3 years old, the lease is 2 years old, and the lease that we just took on. So the kids are assured that they're not going to be working on any machine less than, or greater than 4 years old.
4 years.
And the cost has come down from technology so much that Scott Major actually has been able to do those specific things that he talked about during the budget, the VBRIC system, the upgrading the video and the TV station, because we can buy more computers for the dollar now, and that saves money from the leasing, which now he's putting more into the infrastructure, because, the computers are only good as the backbone that they're serviced by. So, we've thought about the technology and how it was going to be a force, for years, and, 8 years ago, we put in our own fiber, and, it's paid dividend big time over the last few years. So now it's just maintaining and tweaking it. So with those numbers projected, you can see that this line right here is the $6 million. Now, we were in the accumulation stage from last year on. So you're going to see now that we have $6 million, and this is how we're going to propose to use it over the next 6 years, using $750 this year, 1.2 next year, 1.8. So we're ramping up to the big year when we hit that 23 or 24%. And then as it levels out at the 25 and 26%, we're starting to ramp our usage of one-time money down from 1.8 back down to 1.2, back down to 750, back down to 300, until we wean ourselves off of that one-time money. Now, what that'll mean in those 3 years that we're weaning off, that there might be a little larger than that projected $500,000 increase that we're projecting this year. So,
Well, hopefully you'll still be putting some reserve, what you have at the end of the year, if you have excess.
absolutely.
You'll be plowing back in there.
Exactly. So that's 60,000. If we only use 690,000,
Yeah.
that gives us an extra 60,000 to use in a future year.
Yeah.
So as much as we can contain the projected expenditures I have here, we use any of that savings to help us get us over this hump that we're facing as the Ps are slowly increase up to 26, 27%. Yes, Mr. Chris.
Dave, you may have mentioned it right from the beginning. With the $10 million, deficit out there in the future, were you figuring on the the tax rate being 2.5, you said 0 at one point. Or were you figuring no increase from the 2.5 that we currently hold?
I start every budget assuming that we will have no tax.
Okay, so all those other columns are 0% increase.
Correct. So now, okay, so now you can see what the bottom line is. So next year, without a tax increase, we'll be looking at a deficit of $947,000, and that's even using $1.2 million of one-time committed fund balance.
Right.
So now let's go back up to the top of next year and say, all right, this year we got through with a $500,000 increase. Let's say again, next year's we're going to need a $500,000 increase. So $500,000 is equal to just about $1 million. So I put $1 million in here, and you can see the next line now jumps to 57 from 56. And if you go down to the bottom, you can see now that we don't have a deficit anymore. We have a slight surplus of $52,000. But now you can see the compounding, what happens in that 5 years out, we were looking at a $10 million deficit. Now we're only looking at a $9.1 million deficit.
I think that's what I'm trying to see, you know, what impact this is gonna have upon the taxpayer, because it, you know, if we even keep at 2.5 for the next, all these years, will we ever get that? We won't get that last column to be down.
Well, let's take it to the next year, okay? Let's say that in the year 15, 16, we're gonna increase taxes another $500,000. We're gonna realize the $1 million we get from a $500,000, so that 57.8 now jumps to a 58.8. We go down to the bottom, and we can see now that deficit has turned into a $291,000 surplus now. Deficits are the.
I thought it, which one, isn't it a deficit now,
It is a
291?
Yeah, it's still a deficit, so we might have to control expenses a little more, or, look at raising taxes 0.6 instead. But you can see what it did 3 years out, the compounding of a tax rate by establishing a millage for a certain reason, either debt service or PSERS, that will come back and that's established and will pay for those future liabilities that we're gonna have either through debt service or through PSERS.
Right, but we need to look out for expenses out into the future now, more than just 2 years or 3 years.
Right,
Into
which
the
is why we
future
added the
for what
5 years,
we-
yeah.
For what we spend, for the expenses that we have, we can't just assume that, we'll make it up somehow. And so we get into spending way out there.
Right, and I think that's what we have to take into consideration as we start to negotiate contracts with the union and then the transportation contract. Well, for sake of argument, let's just say we're gonna add $500,000 every year, okay? So we have, that goes to 60 million, that goes to 62, so this is a $500,000 every year for the next 5 years. Okay, let's see what that does to the bottom line. This is what makes it interactive. If we say, okay, we'd like to limit ourselves to a $500,000 increase over the next couple of years, you can see it doesn't quite cut it. So now, if we're saying that we have to limit ourselves,
Doesn't quite cut it, Dave, it's $5 million short.
yeah, well, but that's the compounding issue. So now, if you take out, let's say, okay, we can't afford to pay 3% in the next fiscal year, we're gonna make that 2%.
Right.
Again, there's a compounding issue to salary increases also. So by reducing that to 2%, we've knocked it down to $4.5 million.
Yeah.
So let's go to next year and say, okay, we can only afford to do 2 again. So again, it's not compounding quite as quick. Now we're down to $3.8 million.
See, this is good. I wish we would have had this previously for some, when we start getting into spending money, we need to have, at least I do, looking down. It's like if I want to buy a car, I can't just go out and buy a car without thinking how this is going to impact my budget.
Now, would that
in
be
the
a
future.
Ford?
What?
Would that be a Ford?
So let's just say we're
This is
gonna make the increases average
Left for it again.
2% every year for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So with a $500,000 increase in the 2%, we're still looking at a deficit of $2.1 million.
Yeah. That's what we need to know.
Right.
I think we did, right?
Mhm.
Sitting
But, you know, and again, that's a great illustration of what happens when you depend on one-time money. That $6 million is gonna be completely exhausted in 5 years, or 6 years, because we're
We're
using
just
some this year.
postponing the pain.
Exactly. Well, we're softening the blow, because if we didn't have that $6 million, we'd be taxing a whole lot more than half a mil.
Yeah.
But Dave, you will be putting some back every year into that, so
Well,
you'll have more.
But that's, if the projections come in and we can
Yeah.
save money on those controllable costs,
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying, we already know we're $66,000 over our revenue budget,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna earmark that to be put towards Peters in the future, because I see we're gonna need it.
Yeah, right.
You need a lot of $66,000.
And again, but the assumption is, we're not gonna get any more money from the state. You know, 2% increases, a lot of things can happen in 5 years.
That's your Peters piggy bank.
It's a big one. Because, I mean, these are some numbers that we're talking about, multiply this by 500 school districts. That's what the state's looking at. You can tell why they're in a
I
panic.
don't really know what the state's looking at. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. You pick the paper up and read what's going on out there, they ought to run them all out of town.
What's most
You know, it's
important is what they ignore.
What's that?
What's most important is what they ignore.
Right.
So I guess 2 questions. So, thank you for the spreadsheet. It's very enlightening, it always is. The PSERS is a percentage of salary, correct? So I'm thinking that in your formula, if you increase salaries 1%, 2%, 3%, your PSERS line item goes up automatically or no?
Absolutely.
Okay. 'Cause I can't
Yeah,
see the,
yeah, they're all tied together. It happens.
so it just, okay.
What I like to do is I'd like to send this to all the board members, you know, play around with it. And, you know, if you unhide some of these columns, you can see more detail. Like under purchase service, you can see it jumps from row 91 down to 95. 92, 93, 94 contain charter school tuition, other schools, and transportation. So you can unhide those and play with those numbers too, if you just want to get specific into transportation.
Well, I guess the other piece, and this is, you know, we've talked about this before with the, you know, the 3% for the salary. In any contract, if we know that Act 1, we're limited with the tax increase based on Act 1, correct? And we know that the history, the recent history has been like 2%, correct?
1.7, yeah.
1.7.
For us, we get a little bit more.
So, I guess as I look at, you know, transportation contract, labor costs, whatever, anything above that 1.72%, we now have to find that somewhere else or cut programs or whatever, because we're restricted at the 1.72% based on Act 1. Now, we don't know what Act 1 will be in 3 years. It might be more, we don't know. But knowing that it's been hovering for 5 years, I guess?
No, it actually hasn't been that long. It was actually 2.8 a couple years ago and 3.5 years before that.
So if you average it out, I guess is what I'm saying, if you average out the last 5 years or since it's been in existence, my recollection at one meeting was it's probably hovering around 2% as an average. So anything above 2% in any of these formulas, special ed, you know, you can pick the expenditure, that's going to hurt. I mean, you got to make it up somewhere else.
Well, yes, I mean, knowing that the 2% is on our entire budget, 97 million, or the tax rate of, you know, 55 million that we produce, but, you know, it's all how percentages work. If you take a small percentage of a large number, you may end up with more than a larger percent of a smaller number. You know, so a 2% increase on $66 million of salary is one, but a 1.7% on a $97 million budget. So it's all relative, but that's just how the math works.
We've saved some money over the years with retirement packages and things like that.
We have.
We can always keep working at it. But, you know, I don't know what the aid ratio is of the teachers, you know, as to more senior ones or the newer ones or what, but
Well,
sometimes a package will help us.
Well, and getting to your point about retirements, I mean, if the governor succeeds in getting any kind of pension reform, that's going to kick in at a future date, whether it be 2015 or 16, people that have 30, 32, 35, 37 years are really gonna think hard
They're going to get out.
about retiring before they change it.
Yeah, they can lock it in if they go. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that might make a difference.
Yeah, so, like, you know, there are a ton of variables that go into any kind of budget projection, so.
Yeah, I think we do have to look at every little thing, expenditure, and also get creative on income. But the biggest lever, and I think you showed it, is the percent increase in the wages, because it's compounded by the PSERs, by the benefits. And you mentioned the contract, but there are a lot of ways, and you pointed out that that's not just salary increase. There are a lot of ways to adjust that, from, you know, the horrible cutting programs and teachers to maybe getting some of the folks off of the PSERs payroll in different ways, through part-time or through contracting or whatever. So, but I do think we need to be talking about this now, because we need a plan in place before we get to that spike.
Yes, you definitely need to be aware of what's gonna be happening in the future
Mhm.
as you start to commit, because we don't wanna get into the same issue that, you know, several of our neighboring school districts have, where they, you know, agreed to certain, you know, pay structures that they now can't support.
So thank you, that was really helpful.
Good.
Thank you very much for that wonderful chart.
You're welcome.
I really think that did yourself. However, rental income, I didn't see any, am I looking at the wrong thing?
That's included
Increase in
in
rental?
other,
Well, I'd like to know if we have increases in rental, we have increases in everything else. That was one thing, and the second thing is, how about the maintenance on the new building that you want to build? I didn't see anything in there for additional, you're gonna hire more people, I know you are.
well, we already hired more people this year.
You're projecting this out. The building will be built in 2 years supposedly. So, do you have anything in there projecting out more staff in the third year?
Not
And-
specifically for the
And
new
what is,
building.
well, what is the estimated cost in maintaining that new building? Because you're gonna be hiring more people.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it, there is gonna be square footage that we have to be maintained. Especially if we're gonna be maintaining it in addition to maintaining the three-story building.
No, I'm just worried about the new building.
Okay, so we have 140,000 square feet that we're adding, that we're gonna probably need a custodian or a custodian and a half to clean on a daily basis, because that's a lot of square footage. So we're gonna have to definitely reallocate our custodial staff, because especially where all the new additions are going, so if somebody has this wing, they may have 10,000 extra square foot, but down at the auditorium, they may have 30,000 square foot. So we're definitely gonna have to consider that. As far as the professional staff goes, we're shifting one class to another.
Right, no, I was talking about maintaining it, I wasn't
Right.
talking about supporting it.
Well, if you look at what we've been spending the last 10 years to maintain the high school as it sits right now, every year it gets older and older and older and needs more maintenance. By us doing this facelift and repainting and refurbishing and fixing windows and fixing locks and doors, that is actually going to save us every day-to-day maintenance over the next 10 years, until that starts to age and then it requires more maintenance. But the problem is, now we may not be focusing a lot of our maintenance on the high school. Now we may have to focus more on junior high west or Gilbertsville as they start to age. That's why you have to stay after these buildings, and we do a great job of maintaining our buildings for as old as they are. But it comes to a point where they just need a renovation.
So you don't think, discounting the three-story building, you don't think we'll have to hire anything more?
I think it'll be
Square-
relatively small.
It'll be a wash?
As far as the maintenance goes, I mean, as far as why we're doing it and the growth, we're already seeing that. We already budgeted 2 teachers as bubble teachers this year for, you know, the additional, 50 or 100 students.
I'm talking about maintaining the building.
Yeah, well, if that's your question, I said relatively small
It'd be a
additional
wash,
cost.
right. Okay, thank you. Because we never talk about that.
Well,
But that's the logic behind the thought process, though. It requires a lot of maintenance now because things are breaking all the time. As you renovate it and it's brought back to new, it won't need as much maintenance from our our staff every day.
Okay.
Dave,
Going-
I'm sorry, isn't, the other unknown is the cost of utilities should be significantly cheaper with the geothermal.
Absolutely.
So-
That plus, the.
That's kind of an unknown, but we know it's gonna be cheaper.
Well,
and we
the
could
whole
probably-
LEED project is gonna save us money on utilities for the next 20 or 30 years.
Right.
Okay, going forward, the spreadsheet that he has up here, would everyone like a copy of that? And, if you have the different scenarios, or different plugs you would like to see in here, if they could send those to me, and I will send them to you, and then you can just set those up, and then you can just email them out to the board that way. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so if everybody has whatever, however you wanna look at it over the next 5 years, just write up a list or something, and if everybody's coming in with the same thing, then we'll probably have like 4 or 5 different pictures, and then he can send those to us. Okay, and then I think another thing that's not on here, if does anybody have any more questions?
I just have one other thing.
Okay.
We have the meeting next week. We're gonna be asking the board several of the actions that we ask every year. Approval of investment institutions. So as we start to get this 55 million plus money in, we'd like to open up accounts at various banks and investment firms so that we can get maximized. So that's something that you approve every year. You're also gonna be asked to approve the commitment of the fund balance for PESers. You were probably expecting 1.4 million, we were gonna ask you to commit 1.6 million. Because as you'll see as we go through this ending process of accruals of revenues and expenditures, we had a pretty good year. And we projected it was gonna be a good year, but our revenues are actually gonna come in above 100%, and our expenditures are gonna come in below 100%. So it was by design, we're gonna have 1.4, but we can afford to put a little bit more money away for the PESers. So I'm gonna be asking you to approve that commitment on Tuesday also.
Okay. All right. The next